Right, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Just waiting for everyone to come back to the table. Just checking that looks like everyone's online. Right, so we have the recommendations as seen in the agenda, moved by myself and seconded by Mayor Goff. I'll speak briefly now and have my turn at the end. So, effectively, once again, I'd just like to thank our Auckland Council and Auckland Transport staff and board members and everyone in the TURG group that has worked on this item for just under a year now. It is significant. It's a significant day for our city. It's a significant decision. It gives us the strategy and policy and direction that we've been asking for. It also backs up what the public told us through Te Tarakia Tāwhiri. It also backs up what we unanimously supported through a climate emergency, unanimously supported in March 2020 on halving our emissions by 2030, and unanimously supported by adopting Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, I think, July 2020. It is doing everything that we have been telling Aucklanders we are doing, and we're not starting from a zero point of view. There are great things that are underway. The City Rail Link opening in 2 years' time will make a significant difference. We've got the Eastern Busway underway. There's the Northwestern Busway improvements. We've recently opened the Northern Busway improvements. There's the Climate Action Targeted Rate, which brings, I think, almost 200,000 people within 500 metres, extra people within 500 metres of a frequent bus route. And it makes, I think it's about 69 services improved for almost 1 million Aucklanders. It's those things will help change what we're doing as a city, but it's clear we have to do more. And as I tested with Matthew earlier, is that this is not just some made-up figure that we hope for in this pie in the sky. It is actually what we've signed up for. It's what our country has signed up for under the national government. It is what the Bipartisan Climate Change Commission and the Zero Carbon Act is saying we must do. It's also what we've signed up for. We can't pull away from that. The only leader, I think, who's pulled away from their obligations was Trump a couple of years ago. And as we see in America yesterday, Biden signing up to what is, I think, a $375 billion climate action plan, which is significant. So change is happening. We have to change. We don't have an option anymore. This does set us on that pathway. So we've gone through it a number of times. I'll speak at the end, but I would just hope and implore you all to go through the items, support what we've all asked the staff to do. In August, we were very clear on what the TERP's purpose was, and it has come to us in the way we asked unanimously again in August last year. So I'll pass on to Mayor Goff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 3 years ago, every councillor around this table voted to declare a climate emergency. And I thought at the time, that's fantastic. Will there be the political courage to convert that declaration into practice? Well, within a year, we and our officials had put together a climate action plan, which I think is a very good climate action plan. And again, every councillor voted for it. Today, as two very prominent Aucklanders who I deeply respect, Sir Stephen Tindall and Sir Bob Harvey, said in articles in respective news channels, this is an historic opportunity. It's a historic opportunity for us to walk the talk, to convert our declaration and our plan into action that will make a difference. And I say to those that may be thinking not of supporting this for perhaps short-term considerations, just remember you'll be judged by history. Actually, you won't be judged by history first and foremost, you'll be judged by your kids and your grandkids, because you'll be giving them a rotten legacy. It's not as if we need to make the case that we are in a climate emergency. As we sit around this table, large areas of Nelson Tasman, of the West Coast and Northland are suffering flooding. hundreds of people evacuated from their homes. We've had 3 years of drought in the last 3 summers, worst on record. Last year we had the highest temperature in New Zealand ever recorded in our history. We heard from Matthew what's happening in Europe at the moment, record temperatures in London. Look at your news feed today and see what the heat crisis is doing in China, in the Yangtze and Sichuan at the moment. Factories are closing in Sichuan for a week because there isn't the power supply to keep them going because of the drought and because of the heat wave. Anybody that doesn't believe that there is a climate emergency is a dinosaur and will go the way the dinosaurs went. We have a window of opportunity, but it's closing rapidly. We know we have to act now. And this transport emission reduction program is the pathway to convert our plan into the action that we need to meet our commitments, our responsibility, and to show leadership. We are elected to show leadership, and we need to do that. It's no good saying, oh, other places are causing more emissions. You know, we know that our transport carbon emissions are the 5th highest per person in the world. We have an obligation to act to the rest of the world, to our own community, most of all to our kids. And first and foremost, we need to bring those emissions down. But look at the incredible co-benefits that this plan will also have. We've had worsening congestion for as long as I can remember, and no ability to stop it. This plan is the first concrete plan that will reverse congestion. And we know from the Productivity Commission that congestion is costing us several $1 billion a year in lost productivity. We had a report from the Ministry for the Environment not so long ago, about 4 weeks ago, that said 3,300 New Zealanders died last year from pollution largely caused by traffic. 3,300, and tens of thousands suffered respiratory illness because of it. That is costing us billions of dollars, the ministry said, and this is a chance to do something about that. We know that we've got a road toll, deaths and serious injuries and crashes that cost us again billions of dollars across the country, more than $1 billion in Auckland. We know that this plan will help that. We're suffering the results of an energy shock and sky-high prices for our fuel. This plan helps us to create energy resilience and to bring down the cost of getting around. This plan is going to be fair to people because 1/3 of all Aucklanders don't have the ability to drive themselves around. They're very old, the young, the disabled, those that can't afford a car. And as we improve the alternative choices of transport, we create greater fairness for those people. Will it cost money? Of course it will cost money. Will it cost more money if we don't do it? Absolutely. Every year that we delay acting, the problem becomes more intractable and the problem becomes more costly to fix. Would have been better if we'd done this yesterday, but the next best time to do it is today, and that's what I hope that we will do. We've voted for a climate action targeted rate. There's $1 billion there. We've got the Climate Emergency Response Fund from government with $4.5 billion there. In our last 10-year transport budget, we had $31 billion. And some of that needs to go into more effective forms of transport rather than building more motorways that actually don't save us congestion. So, yes, it's going to cost money. Will we find that money? We have to, because the cost of not finding it will be greater. Will this be properly budgeted, worked through, costed and funded? Yes, we will go through the normal procedures to do that. The last point I want to make, Mr. Chair, is that this is not something that we'll be doing on our own. We are aligned with what the government is doing. The public has told us they expect us to do more and to do it faster. We need all of our community to work together, and we'll need to work right through this program to make sure that we're carrying people with us, because this will succeed only if we explain to people what the realistic options are and what the reality of global heating is. And when they come with us, we will achieve this, and we can lead the world in doing that. I urge every councillor to vote what they know to be right, that we have to act now, and this is a plan that will enable us to make a real difference for ourselves, for our kids, and for future generations. Thank you.
Kia ora, Mayor Goff. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Of course, I echo all the thanks to everybody that's been involved in this. And I agree with everything the Mayor's said, everything the staff have said. I think for me, it is going to be, as Councillor Bartley said, in the implementation. And I have to say, in the last 9 years of my experience with AT and my constituents' experience with them, we've not been covered in glory. You know, we've got to do our engagement people. We've got to get people not just scared, but excited about taking on these changes. And I think that what's been really missing is that social media and sending people letters and here's a consultation thingy, you know, do this, is not going to be enough. I think we have to get back to grassroots. We have to get with our communities, because Councillor Henderson and I know very well what happens when you don't. You get 600 people marching in Henderson because you tried to do a cycle lane. 600 people, that's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it since amalgamation and people not wanting that. And so I think the real test or the real challenge here is to really get our communities wanting to work with us and wanting to work with AT, because we know exactly what happens. Everybody likes the idea of it until it affects them or it doesn't do what they want it to do. And so I think that's going to be the challenge. I'll be right behind it. I'm happy to be at any public meeting, but we've got to remember that the AT board are not elected. They do not represent our community, we do. And I would really love it if our AT would work with elected members to know how best to speak to each individual community, because that's where it's going to make the difference. Every town, every suburb buying into this. And we can't do it on our own, because there's a lot of personal responsibility here that goes into this. You know, to buy an electric car, to reduce the amount of light vehicle use, more walking, more cycling, all of those things. People have got to want to do it, and people have got to want to feel, need to be enabled. And we can't just push it onto them, because it will get a backlash. And I don't want to see all this work struggle because we don't do that engagement properly. So I'm really looking forward to things changing. You know, I think we absolutely need to do this, but we're not going to do it well if we don't work with our communities. So that's the challenge to everybody, and our CCO working with us as elected members. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Cooper. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all the staff that's worked on this. It's an incredibly important piece of work. On the morning news this morning, they were showing stones that are appearing in the riverbanks, bottoms of European rivers. And one of them read, "If you can read this stone, weep." 1612, I think it was. Salutary lesson there for us. It really sort of rocked it home to me in big time. There's no silver bullet here. There's no easy way out. We've all got to do our piece. And we might be a small city, world standards, 1.6, 1.7 million, but if every city in the world of 1.617 million or smaller decided to do nothing, then nothing will happen. We have a collective international responsibility to do our bit. And there's also a partly selfish reason for that. Because if we do not do our bit as Auckland and as New Zealand, we won't be at the trade table. And we have to trade as a nation to survive. We have to earn overseas funds to bring in the things that we enjoy as a city and as a nation, both personally and structurally. So I was thinking to myself pretty hard the past few months. We've been locked up with the COVID issues. Thinking, how am I going to change my life personally once we get back to a resemblance of normality? What am I going to do? So sat down with the good wife and we decided, right, I'm not going to come into town unless it's essential. I'll work remotely at least 2 days a week. If I do have to come in and I have a function that night, I will stay in town and I'll fund that. So none of these things are costing the council or the taxpayer. I'll fund that and do that. And that's once or twice a week. The other thing we're doing is, in my private life, is all our machinery will be Eurostar 5 or better. And that comes at a price. And we are adding to a native bush reserve of 400 hectares, around 20 hectares every year, which we have stabilised, which we have protected and nourished as a family for 40 years. That's what I'm doing. And I think everyone can find something that they can do. And those of us who are privileged enough to be able to do more need to do more, because there are lots of people who are locked in to 9, 10-hour days at a factory, at a coalface, where they cannot have the luxury of working from home. We have opportunities, and we need to grab them as individuals and collectively. I really encourage every person around this table and online to support the TERP. Because if we don't, we won't be at that trade table. We'll be seeing those stones like we're seeing in the European rivers, in the Waikato and in the Clutha. We won't have agricultural production for our export earnings. And the risk to our populace, to our health and to our well-being is extreme. I wasn't a great supporter of climate change 10 years ago, but I'm a believer now. I've personally lived through the Tasman tempest, where I saw 230 mils of rain in 12 hours, and our river rose 9 metres. And I've lived through the past 3.5 years of drought, and another one predicted for this year. So the consequences of climate change are very real for me personally, but they're also very real for us collectively. And I urge you collectively to do what you know is right. Thanks, Richard.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Watson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. One of the more informative parts of the various bits and pieces we got with this report was the timeline that accompanied the document entitled Sustainable Access for a Thriving Future. So since 2016, when New Zealand signed the Paris Agreement, committing to cut emissions by 50% by 2030, that followed that predated, I should say, 2019, where Auckland Council declared the climate emergency. 2020, Auckland Council adopted a climate plan. 2022, emissions reduction plan. And then 2022, also the targeted rate, which essentially for a large part of which was putting on additional bus services, probably most of which kick in around about 2024 or thereabouts. So that's been the backdrop to the scale of the challenge that confronts us and is outlined at point 42 in terms of the changes that have to occur by way of response. So walking, the trip share 2019 was 11%, it needs to double to 22%. Cycling, 1% in 2019, it needs to go to 17%. Public transport needs to go from 4% to 23%, nearly a six-fold increase. So there's a huge challenge there that's emerged from the nearly 6-7 years of planning. And in respect of that, we're told, and it's correct, that we're not starting from zero. In the last decade, we've had Britomart, the Northern Busway, rail electrification, new ferry terminals, CRL, and so forth. So we haven't been sitting around twiddling our thumbs, and we could say a lot more if we're talking about walking. We're a country, or a city at least, that has a huge network of probably the most underused infrastructure, and that's pavements. And in most places, except for Herald Island and Whenuapai, there's pavements on both sides of the road. In Tokyo, that use of the pavements virtually achieves that mode share for cycling. They're up to 14%. Thus far, in a relatively quick and simple response with some modifications, we could be using that infrastructure straight away. We're not. So I guess part of my reservations is that if we are to empower Aucklanders to make the changes that we say, we need to be fully cognizant of the fact that none of this will happen unless Aucklanders change their behaviour. Nothing. We can have plans for Africa, we can invest in X number of buses or new infrastructure, but unless people change their behaviour and go across to these different modes, nothing fundamentally will change for the better. And I can think of two good examples of that in my own ward, and I was pleased to see one of the officers referring to the one size doesn't fit all, the need to communicate on a local level. And the two examples I think of is one down in Millwater, where they got a 45% increase in the bus service use by a very localised, targeted campaign by some AT staff that was incredibly successful. The flip side of that is the debacle that's unravelling on Upper Harbour Drive with these concrete barriers put down as a separated cycleway, where up till yesterday we were already up to 23 accidents from both cyclists and motorists alike, and everything that's happened there is the opposite of empowering and bringing people along with you. So I hope it's more the Millwater example that prevails rather than Upper Harbour Drive. I guess I'd finish, Mr. Chair, by saying that I agree with the risk assessment at point 96, which says current structure and processes may not enable the transformational change required, and I agree with that. I don't agree with everything that's in this plan, but I do agree with the sense that it would be wrong at this stage to send it back for another year of revisions and coming back again. There are any number of areas we can be acting on now that we're not. So I want to encourage a response, an immediate response. I think there should be, and indeed there will be, a flexibility to take account of developments and to take account of perhaps more practical approach that create more on the ground progress in terms of vehicle kilometres travelled and their tailoring to specific communities. So I'll be supporting it. I think there's just been too much delay thus far to hold things up. So it will get my support, as indeed I'm sure it'll get most of the people's Auckland support, components of it, but it does need to be looked at again by the incoming council, and more and quicker ways of delivering real change prioritised as opposed to some of them that have been identified here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Kia ora, and thank you, Councillor Watson. Next up, Councillor Simpson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, this is aspirational. I know it's not funded or costed, and every one of us around this table knows that we will continually be financially challenged next term. But that doesn't mean we cannot be aspirational for the future. My ward has recently benefited by having a shared path that has been transformational in getting both primary and secondary children to school off-road. I walked it in the weekend, and I kid you not, there were probably more people on that than there were on the Southern Motorway. My grandchildren can now walk and scooter to school because there are now safe raised crossings across busy roads. There are buses every 15 minutes along Tamaki Drive, and they are all planned to be electrified by Christmas. Why would I not agree to have this infrastructure in other parts of the region? Look, some of this pushes boundaries for me, but we can't look backwards, we must look forwards, to coin a great phrase by Councillor Young on his billboards, which by the way are pretty great. I'm happy to support, signalling our intention, knowing that we have many strategy documents that are subject to individual funding decisions. But if you don't know where you want or need to go, and you don't map your pathway, you'll never get there. This has my support. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. And next up, Councillor Walker.
I'm supportive a transport emissions pathway, but I would suggest, as I indicated, that there are combinations of pathways, and I would suggest a much more flexible approach that is required. I'm mindful that it may well be that the approach that we're taking, based on what we're doing currently, is very capital intensive, very expensive operationally, and may well be unaffordable. And certainly other cities that I'm familiar with do it differently. I referred to Oslo, for example. I am really concerned that as much and all as we may have this pathway, and I would suggest it needs to supercharge the uptake of electric vehicles, running parallel with that, we need to have solar roofs, solar panels on roofs, and much more emphasis around renewables. If we were in an Australian city, many of whom have 50% of their power generated by solar on rooftops with associated battery technologies and the like, then we'd be taking an integrated approach. So this is not just about transport. Increasingly, a vehicle is a battery pack. Increasingly, it is an entertainment centre. It is many other things that mesh with a person's lifestyle. And these changes, just as they were with cell phones, are being driven by companies like Tesla, that is making phenomenal inroads, not just to residential use, but the rollout of the Cybertruck next year will revolutionise the road freight industry. So I have a real concern that things that should be foresighted and adequately backcasted, I do not think have occurred. So I am supportive, but it will only be when we actually start costing some of these rough order projects that will actually determine what's doable or not. And I have a real concern that that has not happened at this point. So yes, I am supportive, but I think that there are different ways of doing it that are faster, cheaper, and drive emissions down much, much quicker. And that is my interest. To coin the Sir Peter Blake term, how can we make the boat go faster? And we should be applying that to everything in a parallel sense around driving down emissions. What are the best things we can do based on where we are now? Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Walker. Thank you. Next up, Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I actually voted against the ILTP in June last year. Following the last-minute 2 years delay to Eastern Busway completion out to 2028. During the meeting, I asked the AT staff about the client impact of the delaying completion by 2 whole years. The response I received was as long as the busway was completed within the 2030 timeframe, there was no impact to our client goals. Reading the turf, this advice was clearly wrong and ignored the urgency of the transformatic change needed. Of course, following strong advocacy from myself, the mayor, deputy mayor, and some councillors, Minister Wood the later commit funding to help bring the Eastern Busway back to the original timeframes, which I'm very grateful for. Minister Wood clearly recognized the benefit for Auckland and New Zealand of the Eastern Busway and our rapid transit network. However, if this pathway has been prepared at that time, my questions about the impacts of delaying a rapid transit project, which is due to completely transfer option for patient Eastern Aucklanders would not have been so easy to dismiss. That is why I support this pathway. It's good and the necessary work to hold us to account and to make a case to government and the Aucklanders about how we can make our city the base of current and the future generations. We are facing regular extreme weather warnings across the world. Nature disasters are increasing frequency. Right now in New Zealand, we have a state of emergency in the Tasman region and the West Coast regions. With the terrible flooding, we know we need to act. The evidence in the turf is clear on what is needed to address our emissions, and the solution includes many positives, such as providing more transport options for Aucklanders, safe streets for children, and other benefits. We cannot risk losing greater and faster investment from government if we send a signal that Auckland is not up for the challenge by deferring or rejecting this pathway. We need to lead this. This is why I am supporting the pathway. Let's move on. Let's moving forward, not backwards. Kia ora, 谢谢.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Next up, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. It's been very, very interesting listening to everybody, and I take note of some of the things that Councillor Walker was saying. I don't believe that some of these goals are going to be achievable, but I would like to just comment on something, and that was back in 2019, when Auckland Council declared a climate emergency, and a lot of us did. I know one of the reasons that I mainly did was mainly for the extreme weather events that we're having with coastal erosion and flooding and stormwater and that type of thing. And I know that the Mayor was quoted saying, our obligation is to avoid our children and grandchildren inheriting a world devastated by global heating. Scientists tell us that if we don't take action, the effects of heating will be catastrophic. Now, I was really, I just want to just make sure everybody remembers this, because I know we just had a vote on 40 foot, which is a neighbourhood reserve in my community, and I actually got a notice of motion. I got 8 councillors to support my notice of motion to take this back to the Finance Committee to try and revoke a decision to sell a reserve, which is much needed for green space, especially with what we have, what is now known as the heat islands. And just for anybody listening, a heat island is when you take vegetation away and you replace it with asphalt, concrete and roads, buildings and other structures necessary to accommodate growing populations. So I just feel that sometimes some of us are saying that we believe in climate change and we've got an emergency, but this was one time that I really do believe that the councillors around the table have really let the community down, that now more than ever we need green spaces. So anyway, I'll be voting accordingly very soon, but I just wanted to make sure that that is noted, and that was one of the main reasons that I did support the climate change emergency. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Member Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very interesting kōrero indeed. Unusually today, I've felt that everyone around this table is hugely supportive of this item, of this pathway, but it doesn't stop us all being vigilant to where we are able to improve. And for myself, it's normally in the equity balance. And looking at those communities and those peoples that are hard to access or hugely impacted, which, as you know, we all try and take them with us. So I support the kōrero that's being expressed here in terms of the engagement, specifically for Māori. Te Tauriki a Tāwhiri, as we know, was well supported by mana whenua, well supported. And then we came to TERP. Now, not that it wasn't, but in terms of timing-wise, it had not the visibility of Te Tauriki. It had all other matters, Three Waters, health reforms, other council regulatory processes. And so there was potentially a gap there that doesn't stop from support because, as you know, mana whenua value above all kaitiakitanga and see climate change in that manner as an area of huge significance. So the investment in terms of engagement with mana whenua as treaty partners and acknowledging what that actually means as a treaty partner would mean that, of course, it's significant. Of course, this item would be supported, but I guess I'm just emphasising, as I did in my earlier partai, Mr. Chair, that comes with a very robust, very detailed engagement pathway plan, whatever you're going to call it, as part of the wider picture. That it really does have to come with the input that you would afford a partner that everyone has acknowledged, especially a te treaty partner. And so, in the overall sense of this item, Te Taruki a Tāpiri and Tūp, of course there will be support for that because that's what the lens that Māori mana whenua have in the first instance. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you so much, Member Wilson. Next up, Councillor Collins.
Kia ora, Chair, and thank you for this. I'm just finding the camera button now. Oh, yeah, found it. Cool. Fantastic discussion, and I'm really happy of what we've got in front of us today. I will be supporting it completely, so I thought I should start with those comments. It's been good to listen to people and where their support is, what drives the support this afternoon, and I'm glad to hear the level of support coming through. So I won't touch on a number of matters that others have already spoken to, but I just thought, given I've been enjoying, and tonight I'm off to Warkworth, I'll be in town for a little while, and then a mayoral debate in Warkworth. That'll be a lot of fun, I'm sure. But as I traverse the city, one of the biggest talking points for many people has been Auckland Transport. Now, I don't want to deviate too much from the TERP, but I'm glad that the chair of Auckland Transport has spoken to our committee this afternoon, because I think it's really important to hear from Chair Adrian Young-Cooper the level of focus, the fact that AT has completely or unanimously endorsed this paper, as well as her words around being completely focused and priority driven when it comes to implementation. I think that's going to be really key, because as I speak with people right across the city, they want way better connection between Auckland Transport and ourselves, and feeling an assurance that they're getting what they want. And I believe that most Aucklanders want us to be a climate resilient city. They want us to take the necessary steps to build for a city that's sustainable, a city that moves with these just transitions, so that we've got a future that our children and grandchildren can be proud of. And I often wonder about the way in which we speak to people. I think, I'm not sure if it was the chair of AT who started to talk, or one of the presenters this morning talked about sticks and carrots. I think it's really important that we measure the way in which we're speaking to the community about the changes and about the steps that we need to take as a community. Because there are some people that you can talk about the evidence all day long, and they're just not interested in evidence, and they think, oh, here come the academics with their notebooks and evidence, and people aren't convinced by that. And so I think we need to be really committed to an engagement process that meets people at where they're at. I was on ZB last night and ended the conversation with the presenter saying, oh, yeah, I just want to get home at night to my child. I'm not concerned about your climate change ideas, Efeso. And whilst that concerned me, I think what it shows is that there's a real spectrum of where Aucklanders are at the moment. You know, people will say what they want about ZB hosts, but I think it's really important that we understand that people are approaching this particular conversation from very different ends of the spectrum. And it's our job to communicate well to people so that they feel like they're being listened to, and that the steps that we're allowing them to see and understand are small, practical steps that they feel like, yeah, we can move in that direction. So as Jacques was saying, the engagement has to be deep and ongoing, and it's in the paper. And that's the kind of engagement we need. Councillor Bartley is absolutely right, noted also by Councillors Henderson and Cooper, that we're the ones who wear it in the community. And it's important that when we're out there talking to Aucklanders about the step changes we need to take in order to be a climate resilient, sustainable society, that we bring people with us. This is the best for our children. We look at this plan, we think, how ambitious, isn't this amazing? Let's look forward, as Councillor Young's posters are saying, well noted, Councillor Simpson. We've got to look forward, but we've got to look forward to a city that is sustainable, and this is the way in which we do it. When we're talking about ensuring that communities are going to be at the decision-making table, then let's make sure that those communities that are most affected because their transport options are so few are the ones that we have at the table. We've got to speak to children, to low-income whānau, to the disabled, to older people, to Māori, Pasifika, women, LGBTQI plus communities, pedestrians and cyclists. That's a lot of people, but they've all got to be part of this discussion. And I want all of us to show a genuine commitment to speaking with all of these communities right across the board so that they know this is where we're heading. And this is a really positive step for all of us. I do think that there's one mayoral candidate who's got a great idea. People are talking about how we're going to finance some of this stuff. Look, let's be ambitious. Let's plan for it first. But when we get to the financing, maybe the government might say, yeah, let's return some of that GST that you're paying on your rates for specific climate activities. I know that person really well. Great mayoral candidate in my view. But we'll start talking about those finance issues when we get to the time. Today is about being aspirational for the city and having this pathway to see that change. So well done, Richard, my friend, Councillor Hills. Well done on bringing this to the table. Well done on ensuring that we're talking about these issues, because this is the time to really make sure we're climate resilient and we're doing everything we can to take this step so that we can have a sustainable city in the future. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Next up, Deputy Chair, Councillor Coon.
Kia ora. Thank you, Chair. I very much would like to speak in support of adopting the TERP. TERP doesn't really sum it up. It's not really a word that you can get excited about, but a pathway for a thriving future. Woohoo, bring that on. So absolutely has my support, and it's been fantastic to hear so much positive feedback about a council document. I don't think I can recall so much positivity about something that's come to us on council, and it's been great to get all the supportive emails asking me to support this coming to us today, and it's been the easiest email I've had to respond to this term, I think, as I just reply, definitely. It is a really massive challenge to get us to 50% emissions reduction by 2030, but we know that it really is possible because we've seen how communities can mobilise when there's an emergency. We've obviously just had the COVID response, which has seen a huge mobilisation, but also I think what Dr. Rod Carr said to us when he presented to the committee about how smaller nations, we might not think that we can actually make a difference, but he gave us that example that we've got to think about that smaller nations made up 30% of those nations that went to fight against Nazism and defeated the Nazis in World War II. So we've absolutely got to do our bit, and it is possible. And I think there's been some really good comments around the fact that Chair Adrian Young-Cooper, it's been really great that you've been with us today with your board members and your team. And as you said, we're already doing a lot of this stuff. We've got the tools, and it's also within the pathway that we don't need to have a big tech breakthrough. This is all within our resources and our powers. We know what the key solutions are, and that's all laid out in just a really beautiful way within the summary and within the plan. And what I also really like about this pathway is it makes sense to all of our documents and our plans and our strategies. And I know there was a lot of criticism around us adopting the RLTP, and Chair, we really felt that in terms of how could we be adopting this RLTP. And what really got lost in that debate is that we did pass a resolution at the time that said we would be doing this pathway work. And it all got a bit lost. I think the original decision was in confidential, and it was really hard to explain that, hey, we are going to be doing this reprioritisation once we've got this pathway. And here we are. It's just fantastic that this is coming to us in this term of council that builds on that climate emergency, builds on Te Tarukia Tāwhiri and those big decisions that we've made. I really want to acknowledge all of the public feedback that we've got, and from local boards have made a whole range of really great suggestions about what we can be doing immediately, what they want to see in their communities. And it was really awesome to have the public forum presentations. So thank you for those. And I just wanted to highlight that that young girl on her way to Freeman's Bay School, Auckland Transport has responded since that video, and there are now planter boxes on the footpath to try and stop drivers parking all over the footpath on that route to school for Freeman's Bay kids. And the lights have been tinkered with and there's some phasing, but clearly there's a whole lot more we need to do to get our communities able to get around safely. And we do know that we've heard a lot today spoken about, that empowering of Aucklanders, and I really do think that we've got that ability within our communities to really embrace what's in this pathway. So I don't think it is, it has been said, this isn't really radical. And I know it winds people up when we talk about overseas examples, because Aucklanders always say, well, we're not Paris, we're not London, we're not Amsterdam. And you've got to remember those places, Amsterdam in the 60s, Brussels in the 60s and 70s, totally embraced car dominance as the way to shape their cities. And they decided, they faced their own crisis. In that case, in Amsterdam, it was around the death of children, and they said, this is not good enough. We're going to totally change the way we develop our cities, move about, and look at the amazing benefits. But what I think is really interesting is that we don't actually have to look at those overseas examples, Mr. Chair, because right here on page 31 of the plan, you've got this beautiful graph that shows that we don't even have to go back to the patronage that we had in the 1940s. It's less than the tram use, the public transport use of the 1940s, puts us on that pathway. So I think that just adds to the beautiful graphics that are in this plan. And I really just want to add to all the thanks of people who've worked on this. It's been a tremendous bit of work. And I just want to end, if I can do that, Mr. Chair, without the bell interrupting me, while I just do my little summary. Kia ora, Kalinda, we're going to miss you. No community has ever regretted having more breathable air, safer streets, improved community connections, better health and well-being, more money in the bank, more money in the pocket of households, and more prosperous businesses. This is the pathway that we're on if we embrace this, and we will only reap the benefits if we adopt this pathway. And the alternative is a really dystopian future. The planet is going to be fine, but humanity, we're facing an existential crisis if we don't put ourselves on this pathway. So I'm really, really pleased that we have this absolutely bloody brilliant work that's come to us, this pathway that we can put ourselves on, that's really going to shape the next steps for the whole Auckland whānau and all of Auckland's communities working together. So kia ora, thank you, Chair, thank you to everybody who's done this work. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor, Deputy Chair. Councillor Henderson, you're next up.
Thank you, Chair. To use a cricketing analogy, the problem here is that we're massively behind on the run rate. And, blocking the next couple of overs really isn't an option. We've got to start chasing. The plan is a signal for big changes ahead, but look, in all seriousness, the proof is in the doing, and I want to thank my councillor colleague in Waitaki for pointing that out as well. Voting through things like climate emergencies and the Te Tarukia Tāwhiri, it's actually been the easy bit. It's not the hard bit. I want to implore everybody around the table and people looking toward wanting to be leaders in the city in the future to actually show some backbone and some steel when the necessary changes come to reduce emissions in your neighbourhood. That's the hard bit, right? and remember that we're elected by the current Aucklanders, but we're elected to represent the future ones as well. I mean, you all have examples of investment needed to give people actually those options to make a climate-friendly choice for transport. We need new bus routes, we need more frequency, we need cheaper fares, we need to invest in our bus drivers to make that an attractive job again, a pillar of the community. And we need to stop the situation that we have in all of our wards at the moment where we've got cancelled buses all the way down the list every morning. It's very tough to go out and say, look, please take the bus when half of them are being cancelled. So we've got to do a lot about that. But it's not just things like safety barriers in the ground that are needed, even though they really, really are. I presented to the Henderson Massey local board the other day, and it was pointed out to me that we're doing great work on more bus routes and cheaper fares and all that kind of stuff. That's all going really well. But where's our work on subsidising bikes? Actual bikes, not just the paths, the bikes themselves. Cost is a barrier for suburban Auckland. That's in nearly all modes. Maybe we need to consider legitimately subsidising actual bike use for outer communities, for poorer communities, and help people directly with their transport choices. You know, I would be remiss in pointing out we need to look at ourselves and challenge ourselves to do better. You know, just last month we voted through housing reforms after being advised that it would damage our climate emissions. That's what we were told, and everybody said that's fine, no worries. This plan that we're endorsing today calls for, in much more polite language than maybe I use sometimes on the subject, more intensification closer to the central city suburbs. There was a study recently, the University of California, Berkeley campus, did a study of 700 world cities, which said that housing closer to work and study was 4 times the impact of transport reform in terms of climate emissions reduction. 4 times. That's the best thing you can do. So we've heard today, you know, let's look at other paths, let's look at other ways of doing this. I've got an idea, I've got another way of doing this, but we've already voted against it. So that's a shame. But we're embarking, I don't want to be so negative, because we're embarking on something inspiring here today and really positive. I'm really glad that Sir Bob Harvey weighed in on this. Our former Mayor of Waitakere, my personal hero, I don't mind saying, his leadership was inspiring on this stuff in West Auckland. We should recall the eco-city values and the heritage that drove that city forward, I think, and brought us things like the Twin Streams pathway that transformed West Auckland. We've been content, if I may say, in the decade of the super city amalgamation to try and be really fast followers and to chase the curve. Why don't we just take this opportunity to lead the world? Grab this plan and take it and lead on it in the future. Inspire young people to stay. I mean, I've got young kids, as you know, I bring them up all the time around here. I want them to stay. I don't want them to move away. I want them to build their future in Auckland. Why don't we be the place that young people want to move to, not move away from? So I think that's what this plan starts us on that journey for. Let's just keep it going and remember it. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Next up, Councillor Newman.
Oh, yes, thank you, Chair. It's been an interesting discussion. I've been waiting for Councillor Collins to clarify how he'll be travelling to Warkworth this evening. But I can say that whatever your mode of travel, Fessler, I wish you all the very best. It's also important to note, Chair, for the purpose of clarity for the team at Generation Zero, that there are aspects of this that I won't be voting for. It's also important for me, Chair, to restate for the record the reasons why I voted for the climate emergency, because I supported that precisely because we need to prioritise our council budget to renew our assets, to build more resilience into our asset base. And that includes reconstructing our roads rather than simply loose chip seals, such as what we've seen in the failed job at Brookby Road. So it's important for me to restate that, Chair, because that context is important. You will quote my vote, but you won't state the reason for that vote. Chair, the future is through technology, EV technology, through on-demand rideshare, through a move away from the contract-driven PTOM model, through local employment opportunities, and through working remotely. And that represents real progress, Chair. But in my view, that's quite a long way from where this TERP has landed. So I'd ask the committee secretary to note my vote against B, D, H, J and K. I might be the only one, that's fine. I have listened to the Chair of Auckland Transport this morning, Mr. Chair, and I was hoping for information from Auckland Transport as to what will be the next 10 transport CAPEX projects that will have to be deferred or cancelled. I know what's been cancelled. Hengaia Stage 2 got cancelled. Necessary road widening and intersection improvements at the intersection of Hengaia and Auckland roads. That was knocked over initially because of a process of reprioritisation because of decarbonisation. And I've been pushing to get Auckland Transport to get that project back on the priority queue. No apology for me on that one. Advocate for central government. Does the TERP give permission for council's advocacy for the construction of the full Mill Road corridor, not the wheel skidding on the so-called safety improvements for the northern section? Is the Mill Road corridor dead in the water as a project? Councillor Young, I can tell you that I so dearly wish that Minister Wood could recognise the value of getting on with delivering the entire Mill Road corridor. There are some really good interventions that are taking place. The City Rail link is good. Rail electrification from Papakura to Pukekohe, that's good. Great to see the Southern Pathway opened, a condition of widening the Southern Motorway. Pleased to see that. In my own ward, I want to thank Auckland Transport for extending the 378 bus route through Karaka Lakes. What a mission to renegotiate that route through the public transport operating model. And thank you, Auckland Transport and the New Zealand Transport Agency, Waka Kotahi, for the AT rideshare pilot through Takanini, Longford Park, Conifer, Waiata Shores, McLennan, and to the Papakura Town Centre. Much of this is really productive, really constructive, and it didn't take the TERP to see that through. But the 378 bus service, Chair, and the AT local on-demand rideshare is about working with people to support their lives. And I interpret the TERP as doing something quite different. This isn't about complementing the lifestyles of Aucklanders. In my view, it's about squeezing Aucklanders in order to change their lives. And the people that are doing that squeezing are comparatively privileged people. You know, we are people who are highly paid elected members, directors, senior managers, here for a 10 a.m. meeting for a debate about a blueprint on how one engineers the lives and movements of people who start much earlier than that, and for a fraction of the pay. The vast majority of them have never been out of the country, let alone travelling to the cities of Europe. There is a very incredibly effective way to address many of the challenges that we have with emissions, abating emissions through the built environment, through energy efficiency in buildings, through retrofitting commercial office towers, factories, workshops, shopping malls. And I have no doubt that as EVs become more affordable, many of the people on this call, I can imagine they'll be lining up to buy one. I'm not going to be persuaded, Chair, by references to courage and to backbone and to steel. I want to know, Chair, who amongst the elected members who are standing for re-election this year, how many of you that are going to vote for the adoption of the TERP today, how many of you that have been travelling around your ward erecting hoardings and call flutes emblazoned with your names and your photos and with your election messages? I want to ask you this. How many of you travelled around your wards on the back of a bicycle? How many of you carried your poles and your stays and your pegs and your tools on the back of a bike? I want to know how many councillors transported their election signs and their timber using utes and vans and trucks, material hauled in trailers connected to vehicles powered by combustion engines. And let me tell you, Chair, I hauled my signs around using a private vehicle. Why? Because it is convenient. Because short trips work for me, and that I do not wish to preach a standard for others that I do not practice in my own life. When I go to Mass at St Anne's, hundreds in attendance, not a single bicycle in sight. Grocery shopping, the same thing. Chair, in conclusion, I note the report, but I chafe against unfunded policies, unfunded plans that hint about the need to reprioritise the long-term plan budgets and the RLTP and the ATAP. We've seen that tactic applied over and over, but it invariably means cuts to vital CAPEX projects, and that further depletes our community's confidence in this council and Auckland Transport. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Councillor Newman. Next up, we have Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. Look, what an extraordinary experience it's been to be part of this extraordinary group developing the TERP. And it's a highlight for my first term at council. I'm really proud of what we have all achieved here. Thank you to all of our officers at Auckland Council, Auckland Transport, and just very clever, dedicated, future-focused people. And I've learnt a lot. And to work alongside Chair Adrian Young Cooper, and thank you for being here, Adrian, and Abby, I think Abby might have gone, and Deputy Chair Wayne Donnelly from AT, it's proven to me that the AT board has an absolute commitment to emission reduction and equity in the provision of public transport, safe cycleways, multimodal travel, and their commitment is there, but this will be up to the new mayor and the new councillors to ensure that the funding and the support of prioritisation happens so that our shared objectives can be achieved. And that includes supporting policy development, not just supporting things at one year, and then when it comes back and it looks a bit tricky, particularly an election year, we decide we're not going to vote for it. We've got to go the whole way and be consistent. Empowering people, as mentioned by Hannah Blackmore, is key. And we have an acknowledgement in the TERP of the inequity of our current public transport system. We know that low-income families use 28% of their budget on running a car, as there is no public transport choice for them, no options. I heard on Radio Wātea this morning that Māori are also expending 30% of their income on home rental. And that doesn't leave much for food and clothes and any other bills that are around if we assume that Māori are also in the cohort who are spending 28% of their household income on running a car. A vote against the TERP is a vote against addressing inequity in communities like Manurewa and Papakura. Thinking that we can stay as we are now is ideologically driven thinking, and it will make Aucklanders' life unbearable, particularly for future generations. The wake doesn't make the boat go faster. It perpetuates an existing inequity. And to not vote for all of the recommendations in the TERP is like the Grinch that stole Christmas. It's selfish and it's mean-spirited for future generations and vulnerable communities. So I'm ambitious and I'm excited for the change TERP is enabling. I'm looking forward to being part of a new council that will reprioritise the RLTP and LTP so we can implement the TERP. And finally, I just want to thank my colleagues, Councillor Hills, Coombe, Darby, Bartley, Cashmore, who are all part of this transformational pathway for Auckland. And thank you, as I said before, to our Auckland Transport staff, Auckland Council staff, and our AT board. And I will be absolutely supporting the adoption of the TERP for my grandchildren and future generations. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you, Councillor Dalton. Next up, we have Councillor Bartley.
I was hoping my mic wasn't going to work. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. I'm very, very mindful that I'm sitting here on a vote about transport emissions reduction when I drove here, and I'm going to drive home in my four-wheel drive. And I am mindful. I don't want to come across as a hypocrite. And I think there are lots of other people out there who are like me that want to do something, that want to, catch public transport. They don't want to be hypocrites. They want to do their part for the environment and climate action. But they need really, viable alternatives. They do need the options. I got options. I could have caught the train, but it was delayed and I needed to get here today. So, yeah, we need efficient, reliable, affordable public transport options, alternatives. If we want people to change their behaviour, we need to give them options to do that. I think the thing that I don't like hearing is when people say, and even myself, might as well take the car. I think that's a good kind of goal to get to, where we ensure people don't have to. Disappearing. I think, like what we've seen, we've got our ideal, the ideals that we want to achieve. We've got this goal, and then we've got all our combined experiences which provide the reality. And I think we can learn from the gaps. We can learn from things that didn't maybe go down very well in our communities, so that we can make this work. I'm really, really keen on the implementation. And I've raised the example of the vaccination rollout as something that we could learn from in terms of behaviour change, community mobilisation, community leadership, and where people are empowered because they could see what they could do as individuals for the collective. And I do acknowledge Ning and Shane, who came out to South Seas, where we held a vaccination event, and they saw this in action there. I also think that we need to change the mindset or the culture of how we do things. Rather than make things more difficult for people to drive, we should look at how we make it more attractive for people to not drive. I think that what we're trying to achieve here is very, very achievable. I think people that are scared of what this could mean, because, you know, for instance, people in their cars that need it because of their kids or groceries or, tradies with that they need the utes to drive around in. I think it's not meant to scare people. It's for people who can get out of their cars, should, and that's people like myself. I think it's very achievable, and I think it's achievable because we saw it in the lockdown, where we had people staying at home and we had people on bikes outside with their families. We had couples walking, which some of us don't need to see. And we had, families out there using the road in a different way. We heard the birds chirping, we saw stars at night, air quality was better, and those that were on the roads were ones that needed to be on the roads to get things moving for the rest of us. So I think it is very much achievable. I think we need to do more to get the vision out there. There's lots of communities there where this isn't even on their radar. I posted about this on my Facebook and I got no likes, no interaction. So, there's we've got a lot of work to do to socialise this amongst our communities. And I do acknowledge yourself, Richard, and Pippa, the Chair and Deputy of our committee, Councillor Darby, Chair of our Planning Committee, your leadership there. In this, sometimes you two went over your brief as Environment Committee and into our brief as Planning Committee, but that's okay. I also acknowledge our TURG, the group and the community reps that were on there. Ngāti Mublair was, he opened my eyes on a lot of things as well. Adrian, Wayne, Abby, myself and Angela that were on that, and Councillor Cashmore. I acknowledge our staff, Jacques, Ning, Robert, Toby, Matthew. Man, you definitely listened to us and you articulated our vision, everyone's vision for reducing transport emissions, and really appreciate all of your work on this. And I don't want to be corny, but without this, without the vision, people will perish, and this is what we need to get us there, to get all of us thinking differently about how we get around our city. So thank you very much. Happy to support this, and look forward to doing my bit to contribute. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Bartley, thank you. And last up, Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Well, we consider a lot of reports over the last 3 years. We've seen a lot come across our tables here, the various committees, and some are memorable, most aren't. This one is momentous in my eyes. This is one that I've been waiting for a long time, and I acknowledge Chair, Mayor, all those part of the reference group and everybody that's contributed for getting it here in this form. Because I think this is a really robust and strongly memorable and absolutely momentous document. Of course, it is signalling a pathway, and a pathway has many points that we need to pass through and over, and they need to be addressed. But this is not merely an emissions reduction pathway for Auckland. This is actually a city-shaping pathway. This will absolutely change the form of Auckland. It'll change the behaviours of us all in Auckland. And the Deputy Mayor spoke of the challenges of, thinking about how one disrupts the behaviours that we're so glued to. I've been challenged by that, and I think that's going to be a big challenge for Aucklanders, but there's an enormous opportunity there too. But the thing, that I want to dwell on here today is this is momentous for a number of reasons, and I've always struggled with the short-termism of a lot of our decision-making around this table. It's just the nature of human being. Today, I think it's momentous because we're looking past that short-termism. We're dispensing with the why-nots, largely. There are a few why-nots lingering. Largely dispensing and shelving the excuse-making. And dispensing with the empty rhetoric, which I've heard a lot of. Yes, I'm backing this, but. And it's been pretty painful to hear that, actually. I think most of us are now waking up to the very raw fact that we need to create change, and we need to create that change at a whole new pace, because there is very little time. In fact, we're out of time, but we're on the pathway now. So it's also momentous for me because we're dealing with a period of change that is probably going to last many, many decades now. And while we're challenged by the disruption and all of that, I can't help but think there is enormous possibility and enormous opportunity before us as well. And I don't think we've quite dwelled on that yet. I think of my kids, but not just my kids, all the kids of Auckland and those yet to come. I have 3 kids, they're adult kids. And when we have family dinners of recent, I've often sort of just gazed across the table and thought silently to myself of what sort of future are those kids of mine and their peers and all those yet to come, what sort of future will they be living? I've had a relatively very comfortable life as a child, as an adult in New Zealand, a really comfortable one. And my background is working class, becoming middle class. Not easy when I was a little fella in my family, but it progressively got better. But I haven't been accustomed to war. I haven't been accustomed to, economic downturn that's put my family on the street. It's been a comfortable life. But the future does not look as rosy, not remotely. And climate change knows no boundaries. It doesn't need a visa to enter New Zealand. It is just here. But what we're tasting so far, and the Deputy Mayor, again, I referred to Tasman Tempest. We could look at Nelson today and yesterday, and a lot of other events that are taking place. They are small in comparison with what is likely to arrive here and what has already arrived in Europe or China currently, or Pakistan in the last week, where 600 people have died. In the last couple of weeks around the world, thousands of global citizens their lives have been extinguished by climate change. Thousands. That is the blunt reality of what we're facing. Now, I don't want to be too dire about this because there's a pathway ahead, but we do have to pull out all the stops as a city and as a nation. So this is momentous in my eyes because we're actually starting to face the future and view the future through the eyes of our children and for the sake of our children. And I think that is a great thing. And it has been a long time coming. We have done it in various areas, but here we are more honestly saying that for the generations to come, we need to change abruptly. We are signing off this momentous pathway today, but there is an enormous body of work that needs to be launched into. And I would suggest at the end of today, Chief of Strategy, we need to send a message to every corner of this council that this pathway is now in place. And then for the very first council meeting that convenes maybe late this year or early next year, there needs to be a report signalling that the Regional Land Transport Plan shall be immediately refreshed and that process be put underway. They are the sorts of things we need to do. I'll leave it there, Chair. This is a really momentous day and I'm really proud of all my colleagues around this table voting affirmatively for this pathway.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. I'll just check if there's any last speakers, otherwise I'm going to speak last. Okay, thank you. Well, yes, happy birthday, Ning. I think you might be getting your birthday wish. Just quickly, even though Jacques told me I'm not allowed to thank the staff, but just do want to thank the staff and everyone who worked on this. I know you're all just doing your jobs, but I know it has been long hours, it's been weekends, it's been through Christmas. I just see when the emails come through and I know that, you know, you're doing over and above what you're actually remunerated for. This is big for our city. It is late, but it's better late than never. And I think we need to acknowledge why we're doing this, and it's through Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, and it's through the fact that through Te Tarakia and Tāwhiri, that was our first major plan we did in partnership with Mana Whenua from the beginning. It wasn't a light touch at the end and a tick this box. It was actually together with Mana Whenua. And they said, and we said, and the communities of Auckland said, we must get this plan underway. We had the biggest numbers ever, percentage-wise, of Māori and Pacifica and young people that submitted to Te Tarakia Tāwhiri than any other plan. So it shows that the groups that this is designed to help, support, give options to, are the ones crying out for this. I think back to the beginning of 2020 when the sky turned orange and we thought that was the weirdest thing that was going to happen in 2020, and that history says that wasn't the weirdest thing, but it was one of them. I was sitting on the bus and it looked like there was orange cellophane on the windows. Australia was on fire, the hottest, longest, most destructive fire they've had. Today I look at Nelson, the Met Service alarm, they've breached any measurable warning system. So their red alert is well above the red alert. They think they're going to get another 300 mils of rain today after the 300 mils they got yesterday. I saw a man on TV last night who said, I don't think anyone in leadership knows what they're doing. I think he might have been talking about the physical changes or what needed to be done, the civil defence emergency, but I took it as no one knows what they're doing about climate, and that probably is true if we look at the world and what has been and currently underway, as I got Matthew to talk about in the Northern Hemisphere. 40 degrees in the UK and railways were buckling and the streets were melting and people were dying because of heat. We're having 1 in 100 year floods every month. We were down in Blenheim for LGNZ last year and we all got our flights cancelled, all had to figure out how to get out. There was serious destruction there. There's 200 homes evacuated and complete streets, looking at the pictures from Nelson today, streets, the electricity, the water, everything washed away. So if we talk about cost of climate action, think about the cost of doing nothing, and we're seeing that roll out right now. Who are we doing this for? We are doing this for everyone who's currently living in Auckland because we need to provide options. It isn't about the stick approach. It is about trying to make sure that everyone has options. And it is a bit about back to the future. When we were kids, we lived on Wyvern Place, a little no-exit street in Glenfield, and we used to cone off the street. All the kids used to cycle and play on the street. That probably doesn't happen now because it's so unsafe to do so. Used to walk to school with my sister. We get the bus to university 13 years ago, but it was actually more expensive back then, cash. It was every 40 minutes, now it's every 5 minutes from Glenfield. There are massive improvements that have happened in the last 10 years. If we think about people saying this is fairy tale or it's never going to happen, the Northern Busway is the best example of what happens when you invest. I remember the white elephant picture in the New Zealand Herald that gets reposted all the time saying this will never work, people on the North Shore will never catch a bus. Well, actually, in 2008, it was 800,000 trips a year, and in 2018-19, there was over 8 million. So it is a tenfold increase in patronage on that one piece of infrastructure. And so we're building the CRL, the Eastern Busway, other things are happening in our city, and that's what this is for. I think about 3 years ago next month, the 80,000 people, mostly young people that march in the street, a number of us march with them for the climate strike protest. There was about 200,000 people across New Zealand march. We're doing it for them because they demanded it then, we're demanding it now. I think of the young, mostly wahine toa, the rangatahi stood here, gave us an amazing presentation, and Waiata, the rangatahi rōpu who were backing the Te Tarakia Tawhiri, they were demanding us do this work then. I think of the young woman from the Otara Bike Burb who presented at Planning Committee, and she said having a bike and bike lanes are freedom. It's cheap and it's essentially, when you've got the bike, it's free travel all around the city, but she constantly said that it's freedom, but it's so unsafe. So many people aren't taking that risk. So what this transport emissions reduction pathway does is give those options and pushes us harder on what we've already signed up to unanimously. And it's what the country's already signed up to. That was bipartisan. I mean, the Paris Agreement was signed by the last government. The current government has got, I think, every party around the table to support the Zero Carbon Act. Maybe it was ACT that didn't support the Carbon Act, but that's okay. They'll get on board eventually. I just think that this is obvious, but I'm also so proud. I've been so anxious. I've been so nervous. People and Chris and others will tell you that I've just been so worried about today, so worried about getting it over the line, worried about the future, worried about the politics, worried about the negativity that can come with change. But I also woke up this morning, very early this morning, because I was getting kicked in the face by my 9-month-old. You know, when we started this process, I didn't even know that it was possible that I would ever have a kid, and I am very, very privileged and lucky that I can. But I think about him and go, if he sat there in 20 years' time and thought, those people, including my dad, did not pass something that will help change the world and the way we see it, to improve our air quality, improve our water quality, give people options, and just create a better environment. It's not about creating dystopia, it's trying to avoid it, because we know, looking around every night on the news, what is happening if we don't do this. So it's pretty clear to me that this is going to pass. I thank you all for the speeches and the comments and the investment into this, but also Aucklanders. Tamaki Makaurau, it's been a tough 2 and a bit years, and I know that change is hard, and I know we're all being sick and being told what to do and asked to do things that have been so unnatural. But I know that people are also demanding change, and they're also demanding we lead, so then they have the options to change themselves. And this is what this is all about. It is giving people options. So thank you all. Once again, I'm just really excited. I feel a bit emotional about it. But, you know, it is a plan, but it's a true plan worked together with the people who can actually change our city for the better. So kia ora everyone, and thank you so much. And I hope you have a good late lunch after this. So I will now move, and we will take the vote all together. I haven't heard for a division, so we'll just go for the vote. And if you would like your vote recorded against...
a division.
Okay. Right. So we're taking all the resolutions in one go, and we will, Kalinda and Duncan will record a division. And maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. Apologies. Cool. So
Thank you, Chair. So this is a division on all of the clauses together. Councillor Hills.
Of course, aye. Thank you.
Councillor Bartley.
4.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
4.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
4.
Councillor Dalton.
4.
Councillor Darby.
4 to the power of 2.
Councillor Philippina.
5.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Councillor Henderson.
4.
Member Wilcox.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
Well, this is awkward. Chair, I'm for A, C, E, F, G, and I oppose B, D, H, J, and K.
Thank you, Councillor. And if you could just send those through to Kalinda and Duncan just to ensure we record that correctly. Thank you.
Sure, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's the same as Councillor Newman, actually. I'd like to vote for the motion, but against some of the sub-clauses, so I'll send those through to Chair just in the same manner, but I am against B, D, H, J, and K.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Simpson.
Yes.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes, I'm 4, and I'm the same as Councillor Newman and Councillor Sayers, and I'll send mine. I'm against B, D, H, J, and K. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Walker.
It's a bit difficult for me because I can't read the B and so on. They're disguised by the. That's better. Can you go up to B for me? Or do you want me to send it to you by email?
Yes, if you can send it to me, because I don't think we can scroll while we're middle of the vote. Sorry.
So I am broadly supportive with a couple of reservations, and I'll cover them off in the email. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Member Wilson.
Aye.
Councillor Young.
4. Denton.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is carried.
Kia ora. Thank you, everyone. And I think maybe like a round of applause to everyone. Felt like it deserved it after that mammoth year also. Right, thank you. We will just move on to, what do I need to move on to, Kalinda? There's no extraordinary business, and we can close the meeting. Well, thank you all, and go have a very late lunch. Apologies. Probably should have had a lunch break, but I reckon it was good to crack on through. So, kia ora, have a good day.